Welcome, Drink with James, episode 199. I have been pulling on a thread recently that I want to continue tugging at just a little bit longer and kind of continue to talk about what we were talking about in the last episode, which was observation. Now, before I jump into the episode, I want to say that super excited because this week on Wednesday, we are going to be announcing the 2020 Sephora Squad. If you've been following the show or the influencer space at all over the last couple of years, I'm sure that you have heard of Sephora Squad. Hopefully a lot of you have applied or left testimonials or thought about doing either of those things. Anyway, this is I don't know if I'm really allowed to say it's our favorite campaign, but it's our favorite campaign that we do every year. And one of my favorite weeks of the year is when we get to announce these finalists. It is truly a life-altering partnership for those influencers who are chosen. And I am super excited for everybody to see the 2020 class. So look out for that on Wednesday. Hopefully, though, it's such a big thing that you won't be able to avoid it. Let's go back to that thread we were pulling on, right? Now, last week we talked about how people are following you because of vision, right? But how do you build vision? Well, you have to become better at observing, right? You have to be good at observation and you have to be willing to try new things and be an amateur. Today, I want to talk a little bit about what does it look like if you're somebody that is in deep observation of the world, right? I think some of the greatest geniuses that I look up to were great observers. How does observation manifest itself? I think a lot of times it looks like curiosity and obsession. Those are kind of two things I want to talk about. First, curiosity. Curiosity is, I think, just being open to, again, pulling that thread, to seeing something new. A lot of times, a curious person is not even conscious of that curiosity. It's just that they've tuned their mind to observation in a way that they cannot help but see things around them and say, what is that? I'm interested in that. I want to know more about that. There's a great story of Quentin Tarantino, who obviously, the music in his movies has always been incredible, right? And he was in Japan, he had a flight to catch, he was in a mall somewhere, he went into some, rockabilly store or something, and he heard this song playing in the store. And he had to leave in like an hour, right? And he's in some obscure clothing store in Japan. And he ended up, talking to the store manager and buying the CD from the manager. Because he didn't have time to run to a music store, and he was pretty sure he wasn't going to find that band's CD in America. So they bought the CD from the clerk or from the manager at this store, and that was that song by the 5-6-7-8s, that plays in the Kill Bill fight scene. That's like, That's curiosity, right? That's like having your mind tuned to new things. And when you see something new, thinking what is that? I need to know more about that. We were interviewing for a more senior designer before COVID hit. And if you make it through a certain level of interviews at 4, eventually you come to me, I'm a more benevolent version of Bowser, I guess. I'm the last person you interview with before you get a job here. And, I don't know really shit about graphic design, but I do know a little bit about creativity. And I remember asking everyone that we were interviewing for this role, I was like, what do you, talk to me about curiosity. What's a recent thing, what's a recent rabbit hole that you've gone down? And honestly, none of them had great answers, and we didn't end up hiring anyone. And for me, the fact that they didn't have an answer about, oh, like I've been really into like, 1960s French cinema recently, or, I'm obsessed with these textiles that this one, tribe in the South Pacific makes. Like whatever it is, I think as a creative, being curious and then throwing yourself into those things and like allowing yourself to like try, even it's only for a week, to become some sort of expert in something. You never know where that's going to lead. Another famous story of this is Steve Jobs, when he was at Stanford, he took a calligraphy class, right? And okay, he took calligraphy class. He never really was much of a calligrapher. And then many years later, when he was creating an operating system for the Mac, he was the first person to introduce fonts. And it was because of that calligraphy class, right? And so it's I think so much of being creative is about collecting things and putting them on a shelf and not knowing when they're going to come out, I mean, this is so much of the work that we do when we're building strategies for brands and we're trying to come up with ideas. It's, you hear a problem and then you're like, shit, I saw this thing 5 years ago that reminds me of this, and now I have an idea, And so to be creative, it isn't always about coming up with a completely new thing, but like, have you collected enough interesting things, enough interesting, enough inspirations and to allow you to create something new out of those things, right? But if you're not curious, and if the inspiration that you get is just on, the same Instagram accounts everyone else follows, well, then your output is going to look the same, right? And so to change your output, to make your output better, your input needs to get better, right? And so I think if you don't find yourself every week or month or whatever it is being pulled into some different rabbit hole, I would start to try and manufacture that and say like, I'm going to get really into this and I'm going to just like do a bunch of research on it and see what I can learn. When I had this like, well, look, I've always been a bit of a snob, right? And I, in college, had this like desire to become a more like well-rounded person. I think, honestly, I was, trying to become some sort of like pseudo-intellectual. And so there was kind of two main pillars of this. One, I wanted to become well-read, whatever that meant, well-read. And I wanted to have great taste in music, right? I grew up in the South in, the late 90s, early 2000s. There's some great rap that came out of Atlanta in that time. And that is mainly what I listened to. But as I went into college, I wanted to expand that taste. So I was like, I'm listening to the blues. And I would start with Robert Johnson. It's like, the foundational blues musician. And I went through to the White Stripes, and then I would say, okay, now country, now classical, now jazz, whatever it was. And I dove into that. And with books, same thing. I made like lists and I dove into them. And forcing yourself to do it, just like journaling, right? You're giving yourself an assignment to journal more so that you can sharpen those observational techniques and skills, right? You do the same thing with curiosity and you say like, I'm just gonna dive into this thing and I'm gonna try and learn something about it. And there doesn't have to be an immediate action. It's about putting this stuff on your shelf and storing it there and being able to then pull on it years later, potentially, to inspire something that you're doing. The other side of that, the other side of curiosity is obsession, right? And I think to be creative and to have content and a life and vision worth following, I think you have to be obsessed. You have to be consumed by what you're doing. We talked about enthusiasm. That's kind of what kicked this mini series I'm on right now off, right? About how you can control the enthusiasm that you bring to your posts, to your content, to your partnerships, to the way that you interact with your community, right? And if you meet someone that is truly obsessed with something and truly passionate about something, they're really, really persuasive, right? And like all of a sudden you may have never thought about, windsurfing or something, right? But then you hear someone who's like, this is their whole life. And it's compelling. And you think, I want to be a surfer. I read Barbarian Days by William Finnegan. Fucking beautiful book about surfing, right? I've never surfed a day in my life. And I finished that book and I was just like, I have this new life goal. I need to ride inside of a barrel. Absolutely have to do it before I die. I have to surf and be in a barrel, because the way this guy talked about it was transformative, and it was intoxicating, and it made you want to be there, and it was persuasive, right? And that's what you all need to do, right? Your job is persuading people, essentially, and that persuasion so often comes from really believing in what you're talking about, and that comes generally from being obsessed with it, And so as we're in this kind of period where a lot of things are on pause and maybe you're not getting as many brand deals, I think this is the time, if you're feeling detached from your content, to try and become obsessed with it. I know the last couple of weeks I've been talking about Jamie Beck a lot, and maybe it's because she's was recently on the show, but I also think because she's recently done something that is, connected with culture in a very real way. And I saw her today. She just has finished her isolation creation series. 60 days, 60 pieces of art every single day. Pretty grueling project that most people would be happy to be over and ready for a little break. And she was saying how, she was doing 5 hours of email that day and how miserable she was and how she wishes she could just create art. And to me, it was just like, wow, like, you've spent 60 days in a row working. And I know those images take her hours to create and edit. And to do that every single day for 60 days, no break. And to finish and be like, I miss it. I wish I was still doing that. That's obsession, right? That's where you need to get. It needs to become who you are. There's a interview I did on the podcast with a guy named Matt Taylor who started this brand Tracksmith, right? And it's a high-end running brand, beautiful clothing, great marketing, but the whole brand is about obsession. It really is, and he says this in the interview. He's like, look, we definitely alienate people. We have a point of view, and he said that. And I said, like, do you feel like you're alienating people that aren't hardcore runners, right? And he said, it's not about how fast you are. It's about how much space running takes up in your life. And if running is a huge part of your life, if you wake up every day and the way that your day is laid out is impacted by running and when you're going to go for a run, then Tracksmith is a brand for you. If running is an afterthought that you do maybe once or twice a week, if you can fit it in, Tracksmith is not a brand for you. That's about obsession, right? It's not a choice. It's something you have to do to survive, to breathe, right? Like, this time has been so hard for me because what I love doing is interacting with my employees, is problem solving, is, being around people and seeing them grow and going to meetings and talking about our clients' problems and helping to solve them and then seeing those solutions come out in the world. Like, that is like my life. I love that. And I don't have that now. And it's got me feeling pretty down because this is what I love to do. And I think that if you're not feeling that way, if you're not feeling like, shit, like, I need to do this, this is what I love, then I think, and I would argue that a way to reset that is to invest in curiosity. Go down some rabbit holes and see where it leads you. Because maybe what you need creatively is just a little spark. It's a photo you saw somewhere that you want to replicate. It's a woman you read about who really inspired you. It's a designer from the 1950s you never heard of that you feel some connection to. I don't know what it is, but the really good stuff in life, I think the stuff that transforms you creatively, doesn't come easy. It's usually at the end of a fairly long road, and you have to walk down it. I don't think that it's spending 10 minutes a day on Pinterest. It's about deep curiosity and obsession. That leads you somewhere really interesting. And if you're feeling a little burnt out, if you're feeling not really turned on by what you do, I think that's a good way to change it. As I said, on the podcast, not a video, is the interview with Matt from Tracksmith. It's part of our what we're calling Next 90 series, where we're talking to leaders in different industries about what the future looks like. Matt's our first one, great one to kick it off with. Make sure you have a listen. Thanks, guys.